This is lesson 12, and we are continuing to talk about functions. The first thing I'm going to do is create a new folder. Before creating new files in the folder, I like to drag it to the IDE. When working in an HTML file, you can put an exclamation point and then press Enter to start your code. This is all good code, but for now I'm only going to keep the title. I add a script tag to load the JavaScript code. I open the folder and we can see our files, but the Go Live service isn't available. To fix this, I simply closed the IDE and reopened it. I started Go Live and then adjusted my windows. I began writing my functions like this. Here we have all the parts of a function. The function keyword, the function name, the structure for putting the parameters, and the function body. I put some space in the body and write a parameter. And then I write a line that will do something. After saving the file, we can see the code in the browser. When these lines are loaded, there is no action that takes place. And this is because the function hasn't been invoked. We can write a line in the IDE to invoke it, or we can invoke it from the console. When we write a function, obviously we have a reason for doing it. This function is designed to put whatever we want in the console. To do this action, we use the log function that's part of the language and is inside of the console object. With this function, now we have two options for writing something to the console. In our code, we can write console.log and put in an argument, or we can invoke the function myfunc and put in an argument. When we invoke myfunc, we pass this as an argument to this parameter. Then this line executes and uses the value of this parameter here. When I save the file, we can see the results in the console. Well, there's not much difference between invoking console.log and myfunc. Therefore, our function isn't very useful. But imagine a situation in which you want to write something 5 times. And imagine that this situation occurs many times in different places of your code. In each place, you will have to have 5 lines of code. But if we put these 5 lines inside of our function, then each time we want to do something 5 times, it only requires 1 line of code. The functions of the language are the material we use to create our things. Okay, we go back in order to consider some other things. This is what is called concatenation, and it's when we use the plus symbol to connect things. Now I can invoke the function, and the argument is added to the string. But our result says, you have Tom dollars, and this doesn't make sense. When you invoke the function, you need to put a number. This is the primary problem with JavaScript. JavaScript permits any kind of data to be passed into its parameters. In most other languages, parameters are very restricted in order to protect the application. But in JavaScript, no. Therefore, if we want to restrict the type of data used inside of the function, we need to check it before using it. And we can do this with an if statement. If is part of the language, and looking at this structure, we can see that if is a function, and here we are invoking it. I press F1 to use the service of beautify, and then I type an argument for the if function. If the result of the argument is true, then run the next line. If the result is false, then skip the next line. If you only have 1 line to execute as part of your if statement, then you don't need curly brackets surrounding the line. But if you have more than 1 line to execute, then yes, just like any other function, you need the curly brackets around the lines. Okay, let's talk about this argument. It's comprised of 2 parts, and this symbol compares them. If they are equal, then this returns true. If they aren't equal, this returns false. So what are we comparing? This is a function, and this is the argument that we are passing to it. Some functions that are part of the language don't require the parentheses when we invoke them. This is simply to make them easier to write and to read. In the background, the engine is putting them there for us. The value we used when we invoked our myfunc function is passed to this function. This typeOf function determines the kind of data that you have passed it. If we execute this function in the console, we can see that the number 1 is a number and test is a string. If we pass a number when we invoke this function, then the type of 100, yes, is number, and this returns true. And because of that, this line executes. Okay, I clicked here to stop the execution, and the function here is ready to execute. When I press enter, the execution of the function begins, and the execution stops here. I press F11 to advance one line. Recognize that the argument passed is not of type number, therefore this line was skipped. When I press F11 to advance one line, I receive this. This is because there are always many things happening in the background. And sometimes when advancing one line at a time, you enter into a strange file. When this happens, simply press F8 to continue until the next stop, and you can close the strange file. Invoking the function while passing a number causes the line to execute. And for the last part of this lesson, we can do more with the if statement. We can provide an alternative if the if statement is false. Now, when we execute the function, passing an argument of type string, the response is false. So the first part of the if statement doesn't execute, but the second part does execute as an alternative. You can ask more questions as well. And with that, we're going to end this lesson. But I want to say, now that you know how to use the IDE, you can play with all the code. For whichever subject, simply search the topic like this. And for now, normally W3 Schools is the best, because they have good examples and you can copy the code and paste it into your IDE. We will continue in the next lesson.